Channel 4 News has seen a damning internal report which says the British Army is failing in some aspects of its attempts to improve equality and diversity. A senior general who's in charge of tens of thousands of British troops says that every woman who took part in a survey claimed she'd been subjected to unwanted sexual attention. Some soldiers thought bullying was acceptable and troops lacked trust in the chain of command to deal with their complaints. Carl Dinnan has this exclusive report.
It's a workplace unlike any other, with its own rules, its own ethos, its own problems. And now we can reveal a brutally honest internal assessment of personnel issues in the British Army. Channel 4 News has been shown a letter from one of the Army's most senior generals as he reviews equality and diversity measures in his command. General John Lorimer commands some 25,000 soldiers. Last month, he wrote to the head of Army personnel, General Jerry Berrigan, with the results of a survey of issues facing his troops. Top of the list was this shocking statement.
Sexual harassment. Every female officer or other rank that my command sergeant major has spoken to claims to have been the subject of unwanted sexual attention. This is an unacceptable situation and one you might consider to be a future area of pan-army focus.
Anne-Marie Element said she experienced the very worst extremes of unwanted sexual attention. She said she was raped by two colleagues from the RMP, the Royal Military Police. But her sisters say there were problems with the subsequent investigation from the start.
The RMP were investigating the RMP and all the witnesses were RMP.
And in the end, what happened?
No charges were brought, and it was a military prosecutor that made that decision not to bring the charges.
Anne-Marie's family say she was then bullied by other members of her unit.
After it actually happened, I remember receiving a phone call from her from Germany, and she was stuck in her room and she was absolutely in tears, and she said to me, "It's awful, the girls are outside, they're shouting things at me, you know, I'm getting bullied, I'm too scared to actually come out of my room."
And the Army still has an issue with bullying, according to General Lorimer's survey.
Bullying. There is still evidence from some that bullying, in all its manifestations, is perceived as acceptable.
Last October, Anne-Marie Element took her own life. We cannot be certain why. Her family are awaiting a second inquest. When a soldier has a problem with harassment or bullying, they should be able to report it to their superiors. But our leaked document identifies a major problem with that.
Trust. There is an overriding sense that soldiers who believe that they have been treated unfairly are not inclined to report the fact because they lack trust that the chain of command will deal appropriately with the complaint.
After the deaths of 4 young soldiers at Deep Cut Barracks, the Office of Service Complaints Commissioner was established. Dr. Susan Atkins is the Complaints Commissioner, but her powers are strictly limited. What can you do if you see a problem? Can you investigate it in any way yourself?
No, I can't. What I can do is if people come to me, with their consent, I refer it to their chain of command. If it's about their commanding officer, I can refer it higher up.
Some have described your office as being toothless. Is that fair?
I don't think it's fully fair, because other people, as I said, say that we have been quite effective. But I don't have the powers that I believe the office should have.
Now, the chain of command doesn't just deal with complaints, it also oversees discipline and, critically, much of the system of military justice. A report recently submitted to the Commons Defence Committee by a serving officer condemned the discipline system as a bully's charter. And lawyers like John Mackenzie have long argued that the system of summary hearings for lower-level offences doesn't even comply with the European Convention on Human Rights.
I and other lawyers have worked our way through various aspects of the military criminal jurisdiction, but this is still outstanding. The commanding officer has a criminal jurisdiction, and at the same time he is doing 2 roles. He's a judge and he's also a disciplinarian. But in the course of this process, the commanding officer is also the prosecutor, and the whole thing's a mess. You can't do it that way.
Tonight, an Army spokesman said,
"The British Army has a zero-tolerance approach to all forms of harassment, bullying and discrimination. The letter obtained by Channel 4 News demonstrates how determined the chain of command is to fulfil their responsibility to protect their soldiers from instances of unacceptable behaviour.
The leaked letter says that in some areas, like racism, there have been huge improvements, and it finishes with a request for professional equality and diversity training. The Army has made great efforts to make women feel at home in its ranks. By its own admission, it hasn't got there yet.
Well, now, we did ask for an interview with a senior politician or official from the Ministry of Defence, but no one was available. We're joined live now in the studio by Emma Norton. She's a lawyer from Liberty who is representing Corporal Element's sisters. And I'm wondering, when you first took this case on and began to look at what had happened to Anne-Marie Element, who killed herself, what sense you got of the culture that surrounded her life and death?
Well, that was the issue that very much brought the sisters to Liberty in the first place, because before she died, Anne-Marie had said repeatedly to her that she had felt she had not been believed, that her allegations had been treated with enormous cynicism, and then she'd been pretty much systematically bullied, ignored, and not given any support.
One of the problems was that the very people suspected of raping her were being investigated by people they probably almost certainly knew.
Exactly. So you've got a situation where the victim is a Royal Military Police officer. She is accused. She accuses two fellow Royal Military Police officers of raping her, and who investigates that? It's the Royal Military Police. You don't need to be a lawyer to see that there's something really fundamentally wrong with that.
And that is one of the things which is shocking about this discovery or disclosure today, that so many women were victims of unwanted sexual attention, because what it seems to suggest is that the Army's very unwilling to look outside itself to have other people come in and help.
I agree. And I think this has been going on for a very long time, and they know very well that it's a major problem. It goes right back to Deep Cut. We represent one of the Deep Cut families.
Just remind us of Deep Cut and what it was.
Deep Cut was there were 4 deaths which were ostensibly suicide, one of whom was a young woman, and there have been a number of inquiries, none of them independent, but what they have uncovered is that there were repeated complaints by female recruits that they were being subjected to unwanted sexual attention. This wasn't treated properly. And the other thing that came out of Deep Cut was that the initial investigation was not independent. It was conducted by the Royal Military Police, which is exactly what happened in Miss Element's case. So it should come as no surprise at all that these problems are just recurring and recurring.
But in this case, at last, you have managed to get outside interference in what the Army actually did. So you managed to get a new inquest.
We've got a new inquest into the circumstances leading up to the death, thanks to the action taken by the sisters. But in relation to the request that the rape investigation be reopened, the Ministry of Defence is still considering its position.
Well, thank you very much, Emma Norton, for coming in.